So there is a biological reality in every person in this room that is both ordinary and also kind of unsettling. All of us have literal blind spots in our vision. Not metaphorical blind spots, but actual, real physical gaps in what we can see. And here's why. Your eyes work a bit like a camera. When you look around in the world, light comes in through the front of your eye and lands on the retina in the back, which functions like a sensor. And the retina has specialized cells that detect light. They have things called rods that help with things like low light and motion, cones that help with color and fine detail. And those cells convert light into electrical signals that travel to the brain through the optic nerve. But here's the hiccup. The optic nerve in the back of your eye has to connect somewhere. And that connection point is called the optic disc. And at this exact point, the optic disc, there are no rods or cones. And so light entering into your eye that goes onto the optic disc, well, there are no light detecting cells there at all. And so any light there, it does not get seen, and that is your blind spot. It is built into human vision. Every single person has one in each eye, and it does not go away. But there is something interesting to think about. Because depending on the distance, what you're looking at, that blind spot gets bigger or larger in ratio. And up close, it seems pretty small. So about from a foot away, the unseen spot in your eye is about roughly the size of a poker chip. And so if you're looking at a book or something like that, it's about the size of a poker chip. Now, if you take a few steps back, if you move back to about 6 feet, that unseen area, that gap in your vision actually grows to about the size of about a college textbook. And that's about how big it comes. But if you move even further back, say about 25 feet, about the distance from the middle of our sanctuary up to the pulpit where I'm standing, each blind spot in the eye covers closer to about the area of a large movie poster. And so I want you to think about this right now. For those of you that are sitting about in the middle of the sanctuary, in each eye, there's a blind spot about yay big. So, think about that. Same eye, same blind spot, but a different scale. And yet here's the truth that's both obvious and mysterious. We do not walk around seeing holes in our vision, or at least I would imagine that we don't. You're not looking at me right now while also noticing the blank circles and spaces floating around in front of you. And so the question is, why not? Well, it's because your brain is constantly doing a quiet little repair work in the background. It uses nearby lines and colors and textures and patterns to fill in whatever is missing. And it smooths out the gaps so that your eyesight feels continuous. And when you have both eyes open, the visual field from one eye often overlaps with the other's missing section in the other. And so between the overlap and the brain's constant filling in process, we experience, most of the time, one seamless image, even though the raw visual data is incomplete. And so yes, our sight feels whole, it feels stable, it feels complete, but that feeling does not erase the underlying truth. The blind spots are still there. And whether we notice them or not, they remain part of how we see the world. I think this is worth naming because blind spots are not just a quirk of our eyesight, but they're also part of the human condition. We all have blind spots. We have blind spots in our thinking, in our understanding, in our judgment, in our actions, in the way we approach the world. And similar to literal blind spots in our vision, we seldom think about them until they get pointed out. The trade-off, however, is that we at least know while blind spots exist in our vision, we have a biological reason why we don't notice them. But in the other parts of our life, well, that reason gets a little bit more muddy. Sometimes we miss our blind spots for simple reasons. Maybe we just don't see them yet. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. Other times, it's avoidance. We might know pretty clearly where our blind spots are, but looking at them, acknowledging them, might mean that we have to admit things we just don't want to. But sometimes we ignore or we look past our blind spots really by judging the faults of those around us. To be uncomfortably honest, it is easier to highlight what is broken in someone else rather than examine what is unsettled in me. It can make us feel like we're in control. It can give us the illusion of righteousness, because if someone else is messier than I am, well, then maybe that means that I can give myself a pass. And I think this is where the tension of blind spots can get kind of muddy, because there are real moments when we do, when we judge or we critique others as a shield to avoid the personal work that we should be doing within ourselves. But at the same time, we also know that there are moments when love requires hard honesty. Sometimes we have to speak truth. Harm is real. Sin is real. Injustice is real. And silence can wound just as deeply as cruelty. And so how do we tell the difference? How do we tell the difference between judgment and accountability? And how do we recognize our blind spots while also not giving blankets to destructive behavior that might be going on around us? Near the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus shifts in his message from describing the shape of God's kingdom to describing the habits of kingdom people. Up until this point in his Sermon on the Mount, he's been pressing into prayer and trust and generosity and integrity, but now he turns towards relationships and the way that people treat one another. And it's here where Jesus names judgment directly. And so if we're looking for an answer on blind spots, this would probably be a good place to look. He says, "Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. For you will be treated as you treat others. And the standard that you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And why worry about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, well, let me get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite. First, rid the log in your own eye, and then you will be able to see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye." And so, I guess we have our answer. I mean, Jesus says pretty clearly, don't judge. And so I guess we're just not supposed to judge anyone, anywhere, ever, right? When someone does something harmful, who am I to judge? And when I do something wrong, well, who are you to judge me? At first glance, this can sound like kind of a complete shutdown of moral discernment. And historically, there have been faith traditions and churches and pastors that have tried to present it in this way. But if that's all that Jesus means here, well, then nobody can name evil. No one can challenge abuse. No one can call out anything destructive. In that interpretation, accountability sort of just collapses and truth becomes optional and responsibility just kind of devolves into community shrugging. But I would say that that's not actually what Jesus is teaching here. In English, the word judge can cover a wide range of actions, everything from thoughtful discernment to total condemnation. And in this passage, the force of Jesus' warning, it points more to the latter. It points to something akin to self-righteous condemnation. He's confronting the kind of moral sentencing that puts an individual in God's chair. Jesus is not forbidding truthful moral reasoning. He is forbidding the posture that treats another person as beneath mercy while treating ourselves as beyond critique. Ultimately, this is a ban on condemnation that refuses self-awareness, because notice what Jesus does. Jesus names the blind spot in us. He says, how can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you get rid of the speck in your eye, when you can't see past the log in your own? Before we can discern the actions of someone else, Jesus is saying that we first have to have humility about ourselves. Jesus is saying that we don't get to sit in a place of divine judgment. We don't get to claim righteousness through the dehumanization of someone else. Instead, Jesus says, first, take out the log in your own eye, and then you will be able to see clearly enough to take out the speck in your brother's eye. And this is really where the difference is between accountability and judgment. Because judgment is about naming someone else's identity. It's about saying, you are bad. It's a sort of public moralism that avoids blind spots because it's busy correcting everyone else. But accountability, on the other hand, is about naming harm that has been done, while also recognizing that we all have logs. Because if we're going to be a society that removes both logs and specks, we have to be willing to look at ourselves as much as we look at others. If I'm going to hold my brother accountable, I also have to be willing to hold myself accountable. If I'm going to ask my brother to grow and change, well, then I also have to be willing to grow and change. Because if I'm not willing to do that, then that means I'm not actually trying to make things better. I'm just trying to make myself look good. But I also want to clarify something very plainly. This teaching from Jesus is not a command to just be nice. It is not a command to stay quiet or avoid conflict or pretend that harm is harmless. And reducing Matthew 7 to politeness in this scripture really just kind of misses the point entirely. Rather, Jesus is confronting something deeper. He's dismantling condemnation as a social operating system. Because think about it. Communities that normalize condemnation as just the way that we interact, they become communities where everyone is hiding, where everyone is performing, where everyone is simply policing each other. It devolves into a series of purity tests and shame economics and fear-driven conformity. And so instead here, what Jesus is doing is he's teaching a different type of social imagination. Communities where people can tell the truth without being destroyed, where discernment happens alongside humility, and where the aim of accountability is restoration rather than exile. This is how communities stay both truthful and also human. And so what does this look like in real life? I mean, personally and publicly, because it matters, because we are living in a culture that monetizes outrage. We're living in a culture that trains us to condemn first and understand later. We are surrounded by hot takes and instant verdicts and constant pressure to pick a side before we have examined our own blind spots. And in that kind of environment, well, Jesus' words, they become a survival instructions for a very heated and divided time. In personal relationships, it means we refuse identity-level accusations. Instead of turning and saying to someone, you are bad, we learn to say, this happened, and it harmed me and us. We name the impact without reducing a person to their very worst moments. It also begins by resisting the urge to prosecute people in public, what should be done in direct, honest conversation. because not every conflict belongs on a stage. The goal is repair, not humiliation, clarity, not scorekeeping. But do not judge is also not permission for silence when people are being harmed. Christians are still called to moral courage in public life. We are called to confront abuse and exploitation. We're called to recognize oppression and to name policies and systems and actions that crush people that are made in the image of God. But we are called to do that by being clear without being cruel, to be firm without landing in condemnation. And so whether we are facing private conflict or public injustice, the call remains the same. Tell the truth, reject moral superiority, pursue restoration where possible, and protect the vulnerable. And so I guess the invitation and the teaching today is this. Before I reach for your speck, let me ask God to show me my log. Before I sentence your identity, let me remember my own need for mercy. Before I speak, let me remember that I too have blind spots. Because Jesus is not calling us to pretend that harm doesn't exist or into a sort of soft denial in the face of injustice. He is calling us towards something stronger and deeper. Truth alongside humility and accountability without cruelty. And so may we be that kind of people who can name harm honestly, who can recognize our own blind spots humbly, and who can practice mercy that restores rather than destroys. Amen.